My truck was idling at the only exit of Redwood Bluff Estates, engine humming low, coffee still hot in the cup holder, when three men stepped directly into the road like they owned it. Clipboards in hand. Relaxed smiles. One of them actually reached out and tapped my hood, slow and deliberate, like a warning. The tallest one leaned down until his face was inches from my windshield. Calm voice. Practiced tone. He introduced himself as Grant Hollis, the HOA board leader, and announced they were conducting an emergency safety inspection. Then his smile faded, and he said the part he clearly enjoyed saying. "We know you've got a reinforced vault in your garage. Firearms. Cash. Give us the code and we'll let you leave. No badge. No warrant. No law enforcement anywhere in sight. Just HOA enforcers blocking my exit at 6 in the morning, acting like gatekeepers to my own life." I spent 14 years in the Army disarming explosives in places where hesitation got people killed. I know fear tactics. I know fake authority. And I know when someone is counting on intimidation to make you comply. Across the street, a neighbor watched from behind her curtains, hands shaking. Later, she'd whisper that Grant always started this way, always with veterans. Always right before they vanished from the neighborhood. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about rules, it was about stealing my home. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I chose Redwood Bluff Estates because it looked like the kind of place where nothing ever happened. One clean gate. Quiet streets. Single-story homes with trimmed lawns and porch lights that came on at the same time every night. The HOA fee was $50 a month, barely noticeable, and the brochure promised low-maintenance living. After years of living out of duffel bags and temporary housing, that word 20 meant everything to me. Clearwater Ridge itself was the kind of small Arizona town people passed through without stopping. One main road, a diner that closed early. Hardware store, post office, nothing flashy, exactly what I wanted. I wasn't looking to make friends or enemies. I just wanted a place to come home to, lock the door, and breathe. When I left active duty, I didn't come back looking for excitement. I took private security work because it paid the bills and kept my skills sharp. Background checks, risk assessments. Boring, methodical jobs that required discretion and compliance. Because of the nature of that work, I was required to maintain a reinforced storage vault in my garage for equipment and sensitive materials. It was inspected, permitted, and completely legal. I followed rules because I had spent my entire adult life living by them. I kept to myself. No loud music. No parties. No guests staying late. My garage stayed clean. My yard stayed trimmed. I waved to neighbors, helped carry groceries if someone needed it, and minded my business. If there was ever a model HOA resident, it was me. That's why it caught my attention when Grant Hollis suddenly volunteered to run the HOA. He showed up to the first meeting in press slacks and a polo shirt with a confident smile, talking about protecting property values and restoring pride to the neighborhood. He spoke smoothly, like someone who had practiced persuasion for a living. People nodded along. Nobody questioned him. After all, nothing was wrong, and he sounded like the guy who could keep it that way. For a while, it seemed harmless. Then the letters started arriving. Friendly at first, reminders. Suggestions. Lawn edges measured down to the inch. Trash cans placed slightly outside approve visibility. Driveways photographed and logged. Notices about routine compliance walks that no one had ever agreed to. The HOA fee jumped to $100 with barely any explanation. A few months later, it went to $180. Then $275. Each increase came with promises of improvements that never materialized. No new lighting, no road work, no security upgrades, just more rules, more paper, more pressure. That was when Marlene Hollis appeared. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just stood there with a clipboard and a phone camera, documenting everything. Her smile never changed, but it never warmed either. It was the kind of smile that said she already knew how this would end, and it wouldn't be in your favor. She'd stop by houses unannounced, take photos, leave notices tucked into doors, always polite, always firm, always watching. Slowly, the neighborhood began to thin out. For sale signs went up quietly. Houses sold fast, too fast, too fast. Prices were lower than they should have been, especially given the market. Families moved out with little notice. Trucks loaded late at night. No goodbye parties. No explanations. It took me longer than it should have to notice the pattern. They were veterans, a retired Air Force couple on the corner. Gone. A former Marine 2 houses down. Sold within weeks. A National Guard family across the street. Packed up and disappeared before summer ended. No arguments. No lawsuits. Just gone. Neighbors whispered about problems with the HOA, but nobody wanted to say more. People avoided eye contact. Conversations cut short when Marlene walked by. Fear doesn't announce itself loudly, it settles in quietly and convinces people to stay silent. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself I was overthinking it. I had survived real threats before. This was just paperwork and power trips, right? Grant would nod at me when we passed, his smile tight, eyes measuring. He never bothered me directly. Not at first. It almost felt intentional, like he was waiting. Looking back, that was the warning. Because the people who sell quietly don't do it because they want to. They do it because something tells them staying will cost more than leaving. I ignored that feeling right up until the morning I turned my truck toward the exit and found 3 men standing in the road, blocking my way like they'd been waiting for me all along. After the roadblock, everything changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but with precision. What came next wasn't random harassment. It was targeted, deliberate, and designed to make me doubt my own footing. It started with a knock at my door. A sheriff's deputy stood there, calm and professional, hands resting easy on his belt. He introduced himself as Lucas Bennett, former National Guard, and before he even stepped inside, I could tell he already knew this was nonsense. An anonymous report had accused me of trafficking weapons out of my garage. Serious words. Dangerous accusation. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I handed him my documentation, permits, work contracts, storage requirements, inspection logs. He skimmed once, then again slower. His expression didn't change, but his tone did. "This is clean," he said. "Completely legal." Within minutes, the case was dead. No charges, no warning, no follow-up. Deputy Bennett apologized for the interruption and left, shaking his head like a man who'd seen this kind of thing before. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Grant Hollis didn't see the closed investigation as a failure. He treated it like a test run. Within days, HOA notices started referencing my frequent departures and irregular travel schedule. The same trips I'd been taking for years were suddenly framed as suspicious activity. My pickup truck, the same one parked in my driveway since the day I moved in, was now described as a potential safety concern for children. Then the cameras went up. Not at the gate, not at intersections, not covering common areas, pointed directly at my driveway. High resolution, professionally mounted. Installed without a word to me. Grant called it a community safety upgrade, but anyone with eyes could see the truth. They weren't watching the neighborhood, they were watching me. Every time I pulled out, a lens followed. Every time I came home, it recorded. The message was clear: we're tracking you now. Neighbors stopped waving. Conversations died mid-sentence when I walked by. People who used to smile suddenly found reasons to look away. Fear spreads faster than facts, and Grant knew exactly how to use it. One afternoon, I noticed a car behind me as I left the neighborhood. Same turn. Same speed, same distance. I slowed. It slowed. It slowed. I turned onto a side street. It followed. Grant wasn't subtle about it. He didn't need to be. He believed the image of authority alone would keep me in line. At the next stop sign, he pulled up beside me, window down, that same tight smile stretched across his face. "Just keeping an eye on things," he said. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Men like Grant mistake silence for weakness. What they don't understand is that silence is often preparation. A few mornings later, flyers appeared on mailboxes throughout Redwood Bluff Estates. No names, no signatures. Just bold warnings about unregistered firearms in the neighborhood and dangerous military-grade equipment stored nearby. The language was vague enough to avoid outright lies, but specific enough to point straight at me. Parents kept their kids inside. Curtains moved. Phones buzzed with rumors. I could feel the shift, the subtle tightening of the space around me. Grant never accused me directly. He didn't have to. He let implication do the work. That's when I understood something important. This wasn't about compliance. This wasn't about safety. This was reputation warfare. Grant was constructing a story, one where I wasn't a quiet homeowner but a threat, where my discipline looked like secrecy, where my experience looked like danger, where fear could be used to justify anything that came next. Once people believe a story, they stop asking questions. They stop defending you. They stop noticing when rules are bent or laws are crossed. That's how you isolate someone without ever laying a hand on them. I started replaying everything in my head, the veterans who'd sold quickly, the silence afterward, the way nobody talked about them once they were gone. The HOA didn't force them out with eviction notices or lawsuits. They pressured them until leaving felt like the safest option. Standing in my driveway one evening, staring into the unblinking lens of an HOA camera, it finally clicked. They weren't enforcing rules, they were manufacturing fear. And once fear took hold, everything else, fines, inspections, emergencies, even forced sales, could be justified as necessary. Grant wasn't trying to punish me, he was trying to erase me. The difference mattered, because punishment ends eventually. Erasure only ends one way, and that was the moment I stopped wondering if this would get worse, and started preparing for how far they were willing to go. The moment everything truly changed didn't come from a letter, a camera, or another thinly veiled threat. It came from a soft knock at my door just after sunset. When I opened it, Eleanor Price stood there clutching her purse with both hands. She was small, careful in the way people get when they've learned the hard way that attention can be dangerous. Eleanor had lived in Redwood Bluff Estates since the first house was built. She'd watched the neighborhood grow, change, and then slowly tighten into something unrecognizable. She didn't step inside right away. She glanced over her shoulder first, scanning the street like someone checking for witnesses. "I don't have much time," she said quietly, "but you need to know what's really happening here." We sat at my kitchen table, and once she started talking, the words came out fast, like she'd been holding them in for years. Grant didn't just enforce rules, he selected targets. Veterans were always first. People with discipline. People used to following authority. People who didn't want trouble. He'd start with anonymous complaints, noise, safety, suspicious behavior. Then came the inspections, endless, invented, always framed as emergencies. Stress piled on stress until families panicked. When the pressure peaked, Grant's associates appeared, buyers, cash offers, below market but fast. No inspections, no delays. Relief disguised as opportunity. Families took the deal just to escape. Eleanor named them one by one. The Whitakers. Retired Air Force. Gone within 3 weeks. The Morales family. National Guard. Sold at a loss and left town overnight. A former Marine named David who lived near the corner lot before me. Harassed until he cracked. No forwarding address. Every time, the pattern repeated. Complaints, emergencies, fear, sale. And every time, the buyer was connected. A cousin, a shell company, a friend of the board. Properties disappeared into a web no one ever traced because no one wanted to be next. They don't fight back, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. They just want peace. And Grant knows that. She told me about records that vanished, meeting minutes that never matched what was discussed, financial statements that skipped entire line items, questions shut down with threats of fines. They bury everything in paperwork, she said. People assume it's legal because it looks official. That sentence stayed with me, because I knew that trick. Authority doesn't have to be real if it looks convincing enough. When Eleanor finally stood to leave, she touched my arm with surprising strength. He's testing you, she said. And if he thinks you'll fold, he won't stop. Please, don't let them do to you what they did to the others. I watched her walk back to her house slowly, shoulders hunched, like someone who had survived something and never fully escaped it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my table and replayed everything. The roadblock, the cameras, the flyers, the closed police case that somehow made things worse. It all lined up too cleanly to be coincidence. I realized something uncomfortable but clarifying. Up until that point, I had been reacting to letters, reacting to inspections, reacting to rumors. That's exactly where Grant wanted me, so I stopped reacting. And I started documenting. I installed my own cameras, legally, visibly, and properly placed. Every angle covered. I logged dates, times, names. I cataloged every letter, every notice, every photograph taken of my property. I noted which board members showed up, how long they stayed, what they said, and who was watching from a distance. Every drive-by went into a log, every unexplained pause outside my house. Every interaction, no matter how small, was time-stamped and preserved. I wasn't building paranoia. I was building a record. Then I did the one thing Grant clearly didn't expect. I filed a formal HOA records request. Not emotional, not angry, calm, precise, by the book. Financial statements, vendor contracts, surveillance approvals, meeting minutes, insurance policies, camera installation authorizations. Everything homeowners were legally entitled to review. I sent it certified. The response time alone told me everything. Grant, who had always been smug, always confident, suddenly wasn't. Notices stopped arriving for a week. The cameras went untouched. Marlene avoided my driveway entirely. When Grant finally spoke to me again, it wasn't with that relaxed smile. It was tight, forced, measured. "We'll get back to you," he said. No threats, no lectures, just distance. That was the first real crack in the armor. Because bullies thrive on silence and confusion. They collapse under clarity and documentation. Eleanor had given me the missing piece, proof that this wasn't personal, random, or accidental. It was a system. One designed to look lawful while quietly destroying people who trusted it. Standing in my garage that night, looking at the vault they were so obsessed with, I understood the irony. They thought the danger was inside that steel door. They were wrong. The real danger to Grant Hollis was something he couldn't intimidate, photograph, or fine into submission. A complete, undeniable record. And once that existed, everything he built on fear was going to start falling apart. The records arrived in waves, not all at once, like someone trying to control how much damage I could see at a time. What Grant sent first looked clean on the surface. Spreadsheets, summaries, carefully worded explanations. But once I started comparing dates, vendors, and signatures, the cracks widened fast. HOA payments were being routed through a management consulting company no one in the neighborhood had ever heard of. The address led to a rented office suite in another county. The ownership trail ended with a familiar last name, Grant's brother. Invoices told an even uglier story. Routine repairs billed twice under different descriptions. Landscaping charges for areas that hadn't been touched in years. Security upgrades paid in full, even though the only visible result was a cluster of cameras pointed straight at my driveway. Nothing about it screamed incompetence. It screamed intention. One line item stopped me cold. Surveillance installation costs that didn't include any insurance rider or authorization. In my line of work, that detail matters. Surveillance changes liability, and liability changes coverage. So I made a call. I contacted the HOA's insurance carrier, calmly and professionally, and asked a few simple questions. Were they aware of privately installed surveillance systems? Had the board submitted documentation? Were homeowners notified? The silence on the other end of the line stretched longer than it should have. Then the tone shifted. They were not amused. The representative explained, very carefully, that unauthorized surveillance installations violated the policy outright. If the cameras weren't approved and documented, coverage could be suspended or canceled entirely. No coverage meant no protection. No protection meant personal liability for board members. And without insurance, the HOA effectively ceased to function. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue. I just asked for clarification and thanked them for their time. That single phone call changed everything. Within 48 hours, board activity spiked. Emails flew. Emergency meetings were scheduled and canceled. Marlene stopped appearing with her camera. The HOA cameras went dark one by one, like eyes blinking shut. Grant knew he was exposed. That's when Diane Keller stepped in. Diane was a retired school administrator who had spent decades navigating bureaucracy, audits, and people who thought authority meant immunity. She had a quiet confidence and a sharp memory, and she'd been watching Grant longer than most. She brought binders. Notes. Her own timeline of unexplained fee increases and rule changes. When we compared records, the overlap was undeniable. Together we started talking to neighbors, not with accusations, but with documents. We showed them patterns, dates, numbers, repeated names. Once people saw the consistency, fear began to crack. Anger replaced it. Homeowners who had stayed silent started asking questions. People demanded explanations for missing funds. Others admitted they'd sold under pressure, or nearly had. The story everyone thought was isolated turned out to be shared. Grant noticed, and Grant panicked. The escalation this time didn't come in the form of letters or inspections. It came from my livelihood. Clients I'd worked with for years called me sounding confused and uneasy. They'd received anonymous warnings that I was under federal investigation, that my work was being reviewed, that they should distance themselves until things were resolved. None of it was true, but reputations don't collapse because of facts. They collapse because of doubt. Contracts stalled. One job canceled outright. Another postponed indefinitely. The income hit was immediate, and that was the point. Grant wasn't trying to win an HOA dispute anymore. He was trying to break me. That was the moment the line was crossed. Interfering with business, false statements, coordinated harassment, fraud, insurance manipulation. This wasn't petty governance or overzealous rule enforcement. This was criminal behavior hiding behind letterhead and clipboards. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by documents, and felt something shift. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. Grant had assumed I'd fold once the pressure moved from my house to my work. He had miscalculated. Because pressure only works when someone believes they're alone, and by then, I wasn't. Neighbors were documenting their own harassment. Diane was organizing financial questions into formal demands. The insurance carrier had flagged the HOA internally. Grant's paper trail was no longer hidden, it was multiplying. Every attempt to silence me created more evidence. Every escalation expanded the scope. Standing there, looking at the mess he'd created, I understood the truth he couldn't see. Grant had pulled a thread thinking it would tighten his grip. Instead, it was unraveling everything he'd built. And once fraud crosses state lines, once insurance and reputations are deliberately manipulated, the consequences stop being local. This wasn't HOA drama anymore. It was felony territory. And it was about to get a lot louder. It happened in the middle of the night, the kind of hour where nothing good ever starts. I was asleep when the first siren cut through the dark, sharp and urgent, followed by another, then another. Red light flashed through my bedroom window, washing the walls in pulses. By the time I was fully awake, the street outside sounded like chaos, engines idling, radios crackling, doors slamming. I checked the clock. 2-something in the morning. I stepped outside to find fire trucks lining the street, an ambulance parked crooked near the curb, and neighbors stumbling out of their houses in pajamas and robes, confusion written all over their faces. Someone was crying, someone else was yelling questions no one could answer. Grant Hollis stood near the curb, hands on his hips, wearing that same calm expression he always wore when something bad was happening to someone else. He announced there had been a gas leak. Not a suspected leak, not an odor. A full emergency. Immediate evacuation. Danger to the entire block. I didn't panic. I listened. Years of training teach you to notice what isn't happening just as much as what is. There was no smell, no hissing. No frantic fire crew searching for a source. Just confusion and movement without direction. As firefighters began checking meters and lines, I pulled up my camera footage from earlier that night, and that's when I saw it. Just after midnight, long before the sirens, Grant's shape appeared on my garage camera. He moved like someone who didn't belong there but believed he was entitled to be. Hood up, gloves on. He opened the side door using a tool, slipped inside, and stayed for several minutes. When he came back out, he was carrying items. Not my items. Long metal cases. Objects shaped to look like military equipment to anyone who didn't know better. Props. Staging tools. The kind of things meant to be found egg later. My stomach went cold. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was a setup. I saved the footage immediately and backed it up twice before stepping back outside. The fire captain approached me not long after. His face was tight, professional, but skeptical. "We're not finding anything," he said quietly. "No leak. No pressure loss. No call from the gas company." I asked a simple question. "Who reported it?" He glanced over his shoulder toward Grant. That was all the answer I needed. Within minutes, the gas company confirmed there had been no service alert, no sensor trip, no report from any monitoring system. The emergency existed only in someone's imagination. Or worse, in someone's plan. Neighbors were allowed back inside. Fire trucks pulled away one by one. The ambulance left without ever opening its doors. Grant stood there watching it all fall apart, his posture stiff, jaw tight, eyes darting. I didn't confront him. I didn't accuse him. I didn't need to. Because what he had done was bigger than me now. Calling in emergency services under false pretenses isn't a mistake. It isn't overreach. It's a crime. It wastes public resources. It puts responders at risk. It traumatizes residents. And when it's paired with documented evidence of staging and attempted framing, it becomes something far more serious. That night, I filed a report. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just facts, timestamps, footage, and names. The fire department did the same. By morning, word had spread through Redwood Bluff Estates faster than any flyer ever had. People were angry, not afraid this time, but furious. Parents who'd rushed kids outside in the dark. Elderly neighbors shaken awake by sirens. Families who'd stood in the street wondering if their homes were about to explode. Grant didn't send letters after that. He didn't show up with Marlene and her clipboard. The camera stayed dark, because the line had been crossed, not quietly, not ambiguously, but in a way that left a paper trail and multiple witnesses. Grant had believed he could escalate forever without consequences. That authority, once claimed loudly enough, would protect him. Instead, he'd done the one thing that strips fake authority bare. He involved real professionals. Firefighters don't play politics. Gas companies don't accept excuses. And reports written at 2-something in the morning, after a false evacuation, don't disappear quietly. Standing in my driveway as the last truck pulled away, I felt something settle. Not relief, certainty. Grant Hollis hadn't just overreached. He had made himself impossible to protect. And once someone crosses into abusing emergency systems to carry out a personal vendetta, the end isn't negotiable. It's inevitable. The fake emergency was supposed to scare me into submission. Instead, it lit a flare over everything he'd been hiding. And from that moment on, it wasn't a question of if Grant would fall. It was only a question of how much damage he'd do trying to stop it. The collapse didn't come all at once. It came the way rot always does, hidden, spreading quietly, until one hard push makes the whole structure give way. It started with county records. I wasn't even looking for redevelopment plans at first. I was tracing property transfers, trying to understand why so many homes had sold quickly and quietly to buyers no one ever saw again. That's when I noticed something off. Repeated applications, preliminary filings, zoning inquiries that didn't make sense for a sleepy residential HOA. Then I saw the names. Grant's family? Different LLCs, different mailing addresses. Same handwriting in the margins, same legal contacts. Same timeline lining up perfectly with forced sales and sudden compliance emergencies. And right at the center of it all was my property. My corner lot wasn't just a house to them. It was the key, the access point. The anchor parcel needed to connect everything else into a single, lucrative redevelopment footprint. Without it, the plan stalled. With it, the numbers exploded. That's when everything finally made sense. The roadblock, the cameras, the flyers, the fake emergency. None of it was personal. It was pressure. Harassment wasn't the goal, it was the tool. Fear wasn't the outcome, it was the mechanism. They weren't trying to punish me, they were trying to make me sell. And once that truth locked into place, the entire pattern became impossible to ignore. Every veteran family pushed out. Every emergency manufactured at just the right moment. Every buyer connected to Grant's orbit. It was never about rules. It was about acquisition. I was organizing the documents late one evening when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again, and again. Something told me this wasn't another threat. When I answered, the voice on the other end barely sounded human. "Please," she said, "I need to talk to you." Tonight. It was Marlene Hollis. She showed up less than an hour later, sitting stiffly in her car for a full minute before stepping out. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the banker's box she was holding. A thumb drive was taped to the top like an afterthought. Gone was the clipboard. Gone was the camera. Gone was the smile. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood there, eyes wet, voice cracking, and said, "I can't do this anymore." Inside, she laid everything out. Shell companies. Fake management firms. Invoices for work that never happened. Payments routed through layers designed to confuse anyone who didn't know where to look. Plans to liquidate assets and leave the state. And worst of all, emails discussing how to redirect blame onto me. Grant had already decided that if things went wrong, I would be the scapegoat, the unstable veteran, the security risk, the convenient villain to explain missing money and emergency calls. Marlene admitted she'd helped set things up at first, She claimed she believed it was tax planning, consulting, normal business maneuvering. But once the forced sales started, once families were panicked into leaving, once the fake emergency went live, she realized too late what she'd attached herself to. "They won't let me leave," she whispered, "and they're going to burn everything down to escape." I didn't comfort her. I didn't accuse her either. I documented. Every document was photographed. Every file copied. Every email preserved with metadata intact. Chain of custody mattered now, because this wasn't just HOA corruption anymore. This was fraud, conspiracy, interstate financial crimes. I made one call that night, not to law enforcement, but to the HOA's insurance carrier. Their investigators arrived faster than I expected. Once they saw the documents, their interest sharpened immediately. Board fraud clauses, liability triggers, coverage provisions designed for exactly this kind of abuse. If Grant was convicted, the policy could recover losses and protect homeowners from collapse. That changed everything, because now powerful institutions had skin in the game. From there, the handoff was seamless. Insurance investigators looped in federal counterparts. Financial crimes units requested records. Subpoenas went out quietly. No sirens, no announcements, just doors opening behind the scenes. Grant didn't know yet, but I did. The man who had thrived on intimidation and control was about to learn the difference between perceived authority and real consequences. By the time Marlene left that night, Redwood Bluff Estates was already changing. Neighbors who'd once whispered were speaking openly. Diane was coordinating statements. The insurance carrier was freezing accounts. Grant's entire operation, built on fear, silence, and paperwork, was collapsing under the weight of truth. Standing there alone after everyone was gone, I felt something I hadn't felt since overseas. Not relief, readiness. Because when someone builds their power on lies, they don't fall gracefully. They thrash. They blame. They destroy whatever they can on the way down. Grant Hollis had lost control, and men like him are most dangerous when they realize it. The only difference this time was that he wasn't facing one homeowner anymore. He was facing evidence. And evidence doesn't blink. The meeting was scheduled for early evening, but the parking lot outside the community center was already full an hour before it started. Cars lined the street in both directions. People stood in small clusters, talking in low voices, faces tight with anticipation. Word had spread, without anyone officially spreading it. Everyone knew something was coming. Inside, every chair was taken. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other in years sat shoulder to shoulder to shoulder. Some stood along the walls. Others leaned in doorways. A few local reporters lingered near the back, notebooks out, phones ready. The air felt heavy, like the moment right before a storm breaks. Grant Hollis sat at the front table with the rest of the board, posture rigid, fingers wrapped tightly around his clipboard. He wore the same pressed slacks and confident smile he always did, but it didn't reach his eyes. His jaw worked constantly, like he was chewing on something bitter. When the meeting was called to order, Grant spoke first. He didn't wait for questions. He launched straight into a speech about misunderstandings, bad actors, and unfortunate rumors. He talked fast, using polished phrases and familiar deflections. He blamed stress. He blamed outside influences. He blamed people who didn't understand how HOAs worked. At one point, he even looked directly at me. This entire situation, he said, started because one homeowner refused to cooperate and escalated things unnecessarily. A murmur rippled through the room. Grant raised his hands, palms out, as if calming children. "We've always acted in the best interest of this community. Every decision, every action." That was when I stood up. I didn't interrupt him. I waited until he finished, until he smiled like he thought he'd just won back control of the room. Then I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I presented a timeline. Dates. Notices. Fee increases. Forced sales. Camera installations. Insurance violations. Emergency calls. Everything laid out cleanly, one step at a time. As I spoke, images appeared on the screen behind me. Documents, emails, invoices, footage stills. Grant shifted in his chair. When I reached the part about the fake emergency, the room went quiet enough to hear people breathing. Parents glanced at each other. An elderly man in the second row clenched his fists. Grant tried to interrupt then. "Those recordings are taken out of context," he said sharply. "This is harassment." I nodded once. "Let's add context," I said. I pressed play. The first recording filled the room. Grant's voice, clear and unmistakable, talking about how veterans were easy to pressure and how they didn't like attention. Another clip followed, where he laughed about pushing inspections until people cracked. Then one where he bragged about offers appearing right when people needed them most. There was no spin, no misunderstanding. Just his voice, confident and unguarded, explaining exactly how the system worked. The room changed. It wasn't anger at first. It was disbelief. The kind that makes people stare at someone they thought they knew and realize they never did. Grant stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. "This is illegal," he snapped. "You can't do this." That was when the agents stepped forward. They hadn't announced themselves. They hadn't made a show of it. They'd been there the whole time, sitting quietly near the back, blending in like neighbors. One of them spoke calmly and clearly. "Grant Hollis, please place your hands where we can see them." The sound that followed was unmistakable, metal clicking shut. Handcuffs. The room went completely silent. Grant's mouth opened, but no words came out. His clipboard slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull crack. Marlene wasn't there. The rest of the board stared straight ahead, frozen. As Grant was led away, no one clapped, no one cheered. This wasn't that kind of moment. It was heavier. Families who had sold under pressure sat with tears in their eyes. Neighbors who had stayed silent looked ashamed. Others looked relieved, like they'd been holding their breath for years and could finally exhale. When the doors closed behind Grant, the quiet lingered. Then someone spoke from the back of the room. "He did this to us too." Another voice followed. "And us." Hands went up. Stories poured out. Complaints that had gone nowhere. Threats disguised as warnings. Fear that had been normalized for so long people forgot it wasn't normal. That was the real reckoning. Not the arrest, the truth finally being spoken out loud where everyone could hear it. I sat back down as the meeting dissolved into something else entirely, not an HOA gathering, but a community confronting what it had allowed to happen. Grant had built his power on silence and intimidation. It collapsed the moment light hit it. As I looked around that room, I realized something important. This wasn't just the end of his control. It was the beginning of something the neighborhood hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Not the kind written in bylaws or promised in letters. The real kind, where people aren't afraid to open their doors, ask questions, or stand up when something is wrong. And once that kind of safety comes back, it doesn't leave easily. Grant Hollis learned that too late. The handcuffs weren't the loudest sound that night. The silence was. Because in that silence, everyone understood the same thing at once. His story was over, and the truth had finally won. Redwood Bluff Estates is quiet again. The kind of quiet I thought I was buying in the first place. The gate opens and closes without drama. No clipboards, no cameras staring into driveways. The HOA fee is back to $50 a month, posted clearly, explained plainly, and approved by people who actually live here. Neighbors talk again. Kids ride bikes without parents watching the street like something bad might happen. Porch lights come on at dusk, not because they're required, but because someone's home. Grant is gone, not transferred. Not stepping away. Gone. He's serving real time, and restitution returned what was taken. Not just money, but homes, stability, and peace. Some families came back, others moved on, but at least now they know it wasn't their fault. That matters more than people realize. I stayed. Not because I won, but because I refused to be pushed out by fear pretending to be authority. I learned something here that's worth remembering. Bullies don't survive on power, they survive on belief. The moment people stop believing the lie, everything changes. You don't need to shout. You don't need to threaten. You don't need to fight dirty. You document. You organize. You stay calm. And you let the law do what intimidation never can: deliver consequences. If you're dealing with something like this right now, know this: silence protects the wrong people. Clarity protects everyone else. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?